My brother bragged at Easter lunch. Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. He said it casually, like a joke tossed across the ham and scalloped potatoes, but the smirk said otherwise. I smiled politely, cutting into my green beans, as silence thickened around the table. Then Grandma Lucille, 81 years old and sharp as ever, turned to me and asked, "So you bought his company out of pity?" You could hear a pin drop. That one sentence shattered years of quiet. For most of my adult life, I let my brother Ethan dominate the spotlight. He was the genius, the visionary, the one our parents beamed over. I stayed silent, even as I rose through the ranks of one of the most powerful tech firms in the country. But on that spring afternoon, at a table covered in linen and pride, the truth finally made itself heard louder than any boast ever could. Growing up, there was never any doubt who the star of the Brooks family was. Ethan built his first website when he was 11. At 12, he fixed our neighbor's router and got paid in pizza and praise. By high school, he was presenting code at regional competitions, while I was still trying to convince Mom that debate team counted as productive. Everyone called him brilliant. My parents said it with pride, teachers said it with awe, even strangers at church would pat his shoulder and whisper, "That one's going far." And me? I was the supportive little sister, quiet, dependable, decent at writing. It wasn't that I wasn't ambitious. I just didn't shine in a way that grabbed immediate attention. I loved system show things work together. While Ethan obsessed over back-end architecture, I was sketching how apps could better serve real people. But whenever I brought up my ideas at the dinner table, he'd nod distractedly, like I was speaking a second language he didn't have time to translate. "Sounds marketable," he'd say, which in Ethan speak meant not technical enough to matter. In college, he went to Caltech for computer science. I chose Stanford for business and behavioral analytics. We were only 2 years apart, but you'd think we lived on different planets. Family holidays became more like tech expos, Ethan demoing his latest side project, our dad glowing, our mom laughing like she understood. I stopped trying to share what I was working on. I figured, why bother? After graduation, I joined a mid-sized startup in San Francisco called Switchly. I started in product operations, helping teams actually ship what the engineers built. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me something valuable. Tech isn't just about code, it's about people, adoption, timing, vision. Ethan mocked my role. "So you're the PowerPoint person," he'd joke during Thanksgiving. "No," I'd say evenly. "I'm the one making sure the product doesn't flop." He never listened. And I never corrected him. It became a pattern. I worked late nights, earned 2 promotions, took courses in machine learning just so I could translate between business and engineering teams, and still, at every family function, I was doing something in tech marketing, while Ethan got applause for raising seed money. I didn't mind. Not at first. I thought keeping the peace was more important than getting credit. But the older I got, the more that silence felt like erasure. And then came the moment I found his company's name grid-pointin' a Beacon Wave acquisition shortlist. And suddenly, everything began to shift. By the time I joined Beacon Wave, I had already learned how to stay invisible and indispensable. I knew how to spot market inefficiencies, how to translate engineer speak into investor language, and how to quietly guide a project through 3 layers of internal politics without stepping on egos. At 28, I was promoted to senior product strategist. At 30, I became director of strategic planning. I never posted about it. I never brought it up at family barbecues. What was the point? Ethan would just scoff. My parents would smile politely and say, "That's nice, dear." I learned to reserve my victories for the office and my quiet coffee breaks with Grandma Lucille. She saw it all. "You're building something they don't even understand yet," she told me once, patting my hand. "One day, they'll ask how you did it. You'll say, by listening more than I spoke." It was during one of our quarterly scouting reviews when everything shifted. My team had just compiled a short list of small but promising startups that might align with Beacon Wave's next expansion strategy. I was skimming through the preliminary report while eating a cold bagel when the name at the top of the page stopped me mid-chew. Grid Point. I blinked. Was that Ethan's company? I opened the file, expecting it to be a mistake, but there it was. Founder, Ethan Brooks. CTO, himself. Focus, AI-powered energy optimization systems for corporate facilities. I remembered when he'd first pitched the idea at a 4th of July picnic 2 years ago, boasting about disrupting inefficient grid models, while balancing a hot dog in one hand and a beer in the other. At the time, I'd smiled and nodded. Now I was staring at a chart that showed burn rate rising, user adoption flatlining, and 2 failed funding rounds in 18 months. The tech had merit, but the execution? A disaster. I felt an unexpected knot in my stomach. This wasn't just some random startup. This was Ethan's dream imploding. I closed the folder and leaned back. For a brief moment, I considered tossing the file to another team lead, citing conflict of interest. It would have been the clean thing to do. But then again, maybe it was better I stayed involved. Carefully, transparently. I flagged the conflict with my VP that same afternoon and was moved into an advisory-only role on the evaluation. I wouldn't negotiate. I wouldn't be in final meetings. But I could help assess fit, review models, ask questions no one else would know to ask. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Ethan had dismissed my work as fluff. Now his company's survival might depend on my analysis. Still, I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt sad. All those years of treating me like I didn't belong, and now, without ever knowing it, he'd walked into my domain. Over the next few weeks, I watched from the sidelines as a team dug deeper into GridPoint. They confirmed what I already suspected. Strong tech foundation, shaky everything else. Their burn rate was outpacing their revenue 5-to-1. Their customer onboarding process was confusing, and Ethan unsurprisingly had no COO, no marketing lead, and no real plan to scale. What he had was code, clever code, elegant in parts. He'd built a robust model for predictive energy management, and even I had to admire this technical vision was impressive. But vision doesn't pay salaries or win investors. Beacon Wave didn't want his leadership. We wanted his algorithms. I gave my input where I could, helped reframe the product roadmap into something digestible, offered insights on how the tech might integrate into our core platform, all while carefully documenting every word, every suggestion, to avoid even a whiff of impropriety. Outside of work, things were oddly normal. We had a family dinner for Mom's birthday. Ethan talked about how the market was shifting and how he was considering some strategic options. I stirred my soup and kept quiet. Grandma gave me a look across the table, as if to say, "How long are you going to let him perform this fiction?" I shrugged slightly. Because, honestly, I wasn't sure. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to embarrass him, but I couldn't deny the small ache building inside me. Ethan was out here spinning his story, painting himself as the lone tech visionary, while quietly being propped up by a company he openly mocked and by a sister he never bothered to ask about. The rest of my family, of course, had no clue. "Ethan's doing so well," Dad said one night on the phone. "You know, maybe he can help you one day, Maddie. I'm sure he'd love to mentor you in the tech space." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. He still thought I was doing digital ads or something. Every time Ethan opened his mouth at family gatherings, it was like the universe rearranged itself around his voice. He used words like seed stage and Series A, like weapons terms that sounded intimidating enough to shut down any further questions. And every time, I smiled, nodded, passed the bread. Until Easter lunch. Until that one sentence, a sharp, smug, and predictable cut through the roast chicken and asparagus. "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech." And Grandma Lucille, your family's unofficial lie detector, paused mid-bite, turned to me, and asked, "So you bought his company out of pity?" Time froze. I didn't answer right away. Because what do you say when the truth is finally louder than the story everyone's been clinging to for years? Silence. That's what hit first. Not anger, not disbelief. Just the hollow, stunned quiet that fills a room when no one knows which reality to believe anymore. I didn't look at Ethan right away. I looked at my plate. The roast carrots had gone cold. My hands were suddenly sweating, but my voice when I finally used it came out steady. I didn't buy his company, I said softly. My company did. I led the analysis team that recommended the acquisition. Across the table, Dad blinked as if I'd just switched languages. Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He laughed once, short and tight. Wait, what? Grandma Lucille sipped her water like she'd just asked about the weather. Calm, precise. You're joking, Ethan said, eyes narrowing. You're not even in acquisitions, you're in product strategy or something. Marketing? I said. 2 years ago. I'm director of strategic planning now. Part of that includes leading cross-functional M.A. evaluations. Dad opened his mouth, closed it. Mom looked between us with wide eyes, napkins still pressed against her lap like she was bracing for turbulence. You led the buyout of Gridpoint? Ethan asked, incredulous. I nodded once. Beacon Wave was looking for advanced machine learning models in the energy space. Your tech was solid, but everything else wasn't sustainable. I didn't say it to hurt him. I said it because it was the truth, and for once, I wasn't going to edit myself to preserve his ego. Heather, Ethan's wife, who had been quiet until now, set down her glass. I saw Madeline's name in the paperwork, she said gently. I assumed you knew. Ethan turned to her. You what? She gave him a small shrug. It was in the early integration briefings. I didn't think it was a secret. You mean to tell me, Ethan said slowly, voice rising, that while I was talking to those execs, my own sister was sitting behind the curtain pulling strings, that she was the one who… No one pulled anything, I said firmly. Your company was already on the brink. We offered a deal that saved your tech, your staff, and your name. So you did buy it out of pity, he snapped. Grandma finally spoke again. No, sweetheart. She bought it out of competence. That stopped him. I could feel the table breathing again, though no one moved. Uncle Marty blinked. Aunt Claire whispered something to her husband. It was like watching an illusion unravel in real time. I'd spent years building something real while being told I didn't belong. Now I was the one holding the truth and everyone else was finally listening. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt raw. Because when you finally say what you've swallowed for years, it doesn't come out as revenge. It comes out as release. You know what this is? Ethan's voice cracked the tension like glass. This is sabotage. Saba. I blinked. Ethan. You've been waiting for this moment, watching me struggle, staying quiet, then swooping in to take over my company like some corporate vulture in heels. I couldn't help it, I actually laughed. Not loudly. Just one short, exhausted exhale. That's what you think I did? That this was personal? He stood up so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood. You never respected what I built. You never understood it. You've been bitter since we were kids, and now that I had something real, something mine, you made sure it ended up under your name. I pushed my chair back, slowly, and stood too. Not to confront him, but to steady myself. You want the truth, Ethan? I said, voice trembling but firm. You're right about one thing, I never felt seen. Not by you. Not by Mom or Dad. But what I did with Beacon Wave, that wasn't revenge. That was work. That was leadership. That was strategy. Don't talk to me about strategy, he snapped. You work in slides and buzzwords. I build things. No, I said, sharper now. You write code. You invent. You create beautiful, broken systems. But you never listen. You never plan beyond launch. You've burned through 2 funding rounds and barely onboarded 10 clients. You know why Beacon Wave bought Gridpoint? Because we wanted your ideas to survive even if your ego couldn't. That silenced him for a beat. His jaw clenched. Across the table, Grandma Lucille murmured to Mom, "Leave them. Let it happen." Heather stood halfway, unsure whether to intervene. Dad looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. And by the way, I added, I didn't take your company. The board approved it. The legal team vetted it. Your investors begged us for a deal before the lights went out. You're lucky we offered terms at all. That's enough, Ethan exploded. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said simply. It makes me someone who sees the whole board, not just the piece in my hand. He stared at me, shaking with something between fury and humiliation. For once, he had no words, and that scared him more than anything. Grandma spoke again, clear as a bell. Ethan, sweetheart, you've spent your whole life insisting you were the only one with a real career in tech. But today, you found out the floor you've been standing on? Your sister helped build it. Silence again. Then Ethan turned and walked out through the kitchen, down the hallway, and out the front door. It slammed shut like a period. No one breathed for a full 10 seconds. Heather finally sat down. He'll need time, she said quietly. I know, I replied. My hands were trembling now, the adrenaline kicking in after the storm had passed. Aunt Claire cleared her throat. Well, should we pass the potatoes? Grandma chuckled softly. Let's pass some perspective first. Everyone laughed nervously at first, then with growing warmth. The kind that comes after something false has finally cracked open. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I was intruding at the table. I felt like I belonged there. The sky outside had shifted to soft gold when I finally stepped onto the front porch. I spotted Ethan sitting on the edge of the steps, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tight. He didn't turn when he heard me, didn't speak, so I sat a few feet away, leaving space between us, and let the silence settle. After a long moment, he said, She really said that, huh, Grandma? She really did. He gave a dry chuckle, but there was no humor in it. She's always liked you more. I shook my head. She just sees both of us clearly. She always has. He exhaled hard. You humiliated me in there. I looked straight ahead. I didn't plan to. I wasn't going to say anything. But when you stood up and said what you said, I couldn't stay silent anymore. That, not everyone can handle a real tech career line? He asked. I nodded. He scrubbed his face with both hands. God, I've been using that one for years. I didn't even think. That's the problem, Ethan. You didn't think. About what it meant. About how it landed. I've spent years listening to you tell the family that I'm just someone who makes nice slides. Because I thought you were, he said honestly. You never corrected me. You never asked. He turned to face me then, the edge gone from his voice, replaced by something softer. Why didn't you ever say anything, Maddie? I hesitated. Because I thought maybe it wasn't worth the fight. Because I thought keeping the peace mattered more than being seen. But that kind of peace? I paused. It's just silence with a prettier name. He looked down at his hands. So, how bad was Gridpoint? Your tech was brilliant, I said gently. But the business was bleeding. Your churn rate was unsustainable. You had no real marketing, no onboarding team, no financial strategy. You were 3 months from layoffs. He didn't speak for a while. When he did, his voice was barely audible. I knew we were in trouble. I kept thinking one more round of funding. One more breakthrough. I know, I said. That's what founders do. But sometimes the most visionary thing you can do is ask for help, or let someone else help. He stared into the distance. You really led the team that pushed the acquisition? I nodded. I recused myself from the final negotiation, but yes, I'm the one who flagged your company in the first place. He was quiet again. Then, so, you saved me. I met his eyes. I saved your work, your team, your technology. I didn't do it to rescue your pride, Ethan. I did it because I believed your idea deserved a second chance, even if the execution needed help. He gave a small, rueful laugh. And now I work for you. You work with us, I corrected. You'll be reporting to Marcus in technical integration. He's brilliant and patient. You'll learn a lot. He tilted his head. And you? I'm still overseeing strategic planning, I smiled. But I'll be around. He was quiet again, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a stress balla promotional one with the Gridpoint logo. He turned it over in his palm like it held something heavier. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Being second, or being wrong. You're not second, Ethan, I said softly. You're just not alone anymore. He looked over at me, the fight drained from his face. I've been a jerk. I smirked. An arrogant, condescending, brilliant jerk. He actually laughed this time, full and honest. Fair. I stood up and offered my hand. He looked at it for a moment, then took it. We stood in silence for a beat, watching the light spill across the street. Ready to go back in? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, I think I am. And together, for the first time in a long time, we walked back into the house not as competitors, but as something new. When we walked back into the dining room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversations that had been forcibly cheerful dropped into awkward silence. Forks paused midair. Grandma Lucille raised one eyebrow but said nothing. She didn't need to. Ethan slid back into his seat beside Heather. I returned to mine, between Grandma and Michael, my longtime partner, who greeted me with a reassuring squeeze of the hand. Uncle Marty cleared his throat. Everything okay? Ethan looked up. We're working on it. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it wasn't denial either. For Ethan, that was growth. Dinner resumed in fits and starts. Talk turned to neutral topics: spring allergies, baseball, someone's trip to Yosemite. But under it all was a quiet tension, like everyone was still waiting for the air to clear. I thought maybe that was all we'd get, that we'd brush the confrontation under the rug like families so often do. But then, as my mother passed the rolls to Aunt Claire, she glanced down the table at me. Madeline, she said softly, why didn't you ever tell us how far you'd come in your career? All eyes turned. I hesitated. Because I got used to thinking no one wanted to know. Dad looked up, face clouded with guilt. That's not true. Maybe not intentionally, I said. But Ethan's accomplishments always took up so much space. There just wasn't room for mine. Ethan flinched, but didn't interrupt. Grandma Lucille placed a hand over mine. That ends now. Michael nodded beside me. Madeline leads one of the most respected strategic divisions in the industry. Her team doesn't just follow trends, they set them. Aunt Claire blinked. Is that true? It is, Grandma answered before I could. You all thought Ethan was our only tech prodigy. Turns out, our Madeline was building something bigger, quieter, and arguably more lasting. Heather smiled gently. I looked her up after I saw her name in the paperwork. Her portfolio is impressive, doesn't even cover it. Even Dad looked stunned. I had no idea. Sweetheart, I'm sorry, we should have asked. I nodded, not out of bitterness, but quiet acceptance. We all got used to the story where Ethan was the visionary and I was the tag-along. I stopped correcting it. Well, Grandma said, raising her water glass like a toast, here's to rewrites. Everyone chuckled softly, relief replacing the tension. Something old had been broken open, and something new was taking root. Later, as dessert was Serval lemon meringue pie, Ethan's favorite, he cleared his throat. I owe you all something, he said, especially you, Maddie. I looked up. I didn't just ignore your career, I minimized it. Because, if I admitted how successful you'd become, I'd have to admit that I wasn't the only one who mattered. The room fell still. You deserve every bit of recognition, he added. Not because you're my sister, but because you earned it. I blinked hard. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And this time, it was enough. 3 months later, I sat across from Ethan in the Beacon Wave cafeteria usual Tuesday lunch. He was hunched over a tablet, excitedly sketching out a new architecture proposal for Gridpoint's core algorithm, now rebranded under Beacon Wave's platform. I think if we refactor the prediction loop here, he said, pointing with a plastic fork, we could reduce processing time by another 18%. I smiled. Which will make enterprise clients very, very happy. He grinned. Especially that energy conglomerate we just signed. Which your work helped close, I added. It still surprised me how natural this collaboration had become. At first, working under the same roof had been awkward. He was defensive. I was cautious. But slowly, the walls came down. Ethan had learned to accept feedback without turning it into a battle. I had learned to speak with confidence, even in rooms that once made me shrink. Our parents had come to visit the office last month. Mom brought cookies for the team. Dad wandered around asking what a tech stack was, but he beamed with pride when he saw both our names on the leadership wall. At dinner that night, for the first time ever, they asked me about my job before they asked Ethan. It wasn't just a shift, it was a reset. Even Grandma Lucille noticed. She invited us over one Sunday for pot roast and chess, and as we cleared the dishes, she clasped our hands and said, "You two are like code and interface different layers, same purpose." Ethan laughed. "She means we finally make a good team." "Don't get cocky," I teased. He leaned back in his chair, quiet for a moment, then, "You know, I used to think leadership meant being the smartest guy in the room." "It helps," I smirked. "But now," he said, "I think it means listening to the people who see what you can't. That's what you've always done. You saw the gaps, and instead of calling them flaws, you built bridges." I looked at him. "We're still building." He nodded. "But this time, we're not building alone." Later that week, we presented our first joint roadmap at the company town hall. I handled the strategy. He handled the tech. For the first time in front of hundreds, we stood as equals, not siblings in competition, but collaborators in something real. Afterward, Ethan turned to me backstage and said, "You know, for someone in just marketing, you're kind of brilliant." I raised an eyebrow. "You're only just catching on?" He grinned. "Better late than never." As we stepped back into the crowd, I realized something. The greatest thing I'd ever built wasn't a product or a portfolio. It was this new version of us, born not from rivalry, but from truth. And the courage to finally let it be seen.